There are moments in life when a single thought refuses to leave. It lingers like a familiar shadow, showing up at odd hours, when you wake up, when you're driving, when you're praying, or just sitting in stillness. You've fasted, prayed, tried to distract yourself, spoken with wise counsel, and even rebuked the thought like it was an attack. But still, their face returns. Their name echoes in your heart, and the memory or mystery of that person becomes a recurring presence in the chambers of your mind. It's not just a memory, it feels alive, as if it's knocking on your soul's door, asking to be noticed. And this begins a deep inner wrestling. Why can't I stop thinking about them? Some days it feels holy, like maybe God is prompting something. Other days it feels heavy, confusing, even tormenting. Is it a divine stirring or a trap disguised as sentiment? Is it conviction, curiosity, or spiritual warfare in disguise? And this is where the heart begins to spiral. Not every thought that won't leave is from God, and not every burden is an attack from the enemy. Some are both, some are neither, and many are invitations into something deeper. The truth is, when a person occupies your thoughts with such intensity, it could mean many things. Sometimes it's because of unfinished emotional business, pain unprocessed, words unsaid, healing that's been delayed. Other times it's the soul recognizing a connection that was spiritually significant, even if brief. Or maybe God is showing you something about your own heart through the presence of that person's memory. Sometimes the person isn't the point. They are a mirror God is using to reflect something within you. And yet, there are times when the memory is actually a warning, a gentle check in your spirit that you're holding onto something or someone who has no future in your story. Wisdom is required. Discernment is essential. Because the mind is a battlefield, but it's also a garden. It's where both God and the enemy plant seeds. And if we're not careful, we'll either water a weed or trample on something God is trying to grow. What makes this process so painful is that the emotions are real. Even if the connection was short-lived or never reciprocated, the imprint it left on your spirit is undeniable. You may feel embarrassed for caring this much. You may judge yourself harshly, thinking, "It's been too long, I should be over this." But here's the truth. The soul doesn't work on our timeline. Healing, clarity, and closure don't follow human deadlines. That person may have awakened something in you that had nothing to do with romance or friendship, but everything to do with purpose, identity, or even a spiritual assignment. Sometimes the person isn't the problem, it's what they represented. They showed up during a season of vulnerability or growth, and their presence marked a shift in your journey. But when they left, or when the door closed, it felt like something unfinished remained, like your heart was still holding a letter it never got to deliver. That lingering ache is not weakness. It's often the soul still waiting for peace. And here's where things get even more complicated. Sometimes, God does speak through people, not just through their presence, but even through their absence. There are times when God will allow someone to pass through your life to awaken you to a deeper hunger, to stir you toward transformation, to highlight areas that still need healing. That person becomes a catalyst, not a destination. And we misinterpret the meaning when we confuse the tool with the treasure. If you're stuck wondering why you still think about someone, start by asking not why them, but why now? What is God saying to me through this thought? What door is He trying to open or close within my heart? Is this a divine signal or a soul wound that needs attention? The person may have triggered a memory from your past that still needs healing. Or maybe they awakened a hope that God wants to redirect into something deeper, perhaps not toward them, but toward your calling, your self-worth, your restoration. And we must be brutally honest in prayer. God, I don't know what this is, but I surrender it. I lay it at your feet. If it's from you, confirm it. If it's not, remove it. But don't let me stay stuck in a loop you never called me to live in. Because here's the danger. If we don't bring these recurring thoughts into submission under Christ, they can quietly become idols. Yes, even thoughts of a person. We start to give them emotional real estate, playing out imaginary conversations, rewriting scenarios, fantasizing about reconciliations, or scrolling through their life from a distance. We think we're just processing, but in reality, we're feeding a fixation, and fixations can grow into strongholds if they're not surrendered. The enemy loves when our thoughts look innocent but become consuming. He doesn't need us to sin dramatically, he just needs us to stay distracted. So if your thoughts about someone have crossed into obsession, it's time to detox your soul. That doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means inviting God into every crevice of that care. Lord, help me let go of what's not mine. Help me make peace with what I don't understand. Help me release what I can't resolve. And sometimes, that process involves grieving. Not just grieving the person, but grieving the hope you attach to them. The dream. The what could have been. You're not just letting go of a face. You're letting go of the future you secretly built around them. And grief, when done with God, becomes holy ground. It clears the clutter of our minds and makes space for divine revelation. Over time, as you lay this burden down again and again, you'll notice something shift. The ache won't sting the same way. The fog will begin to lift, and clarity will emerge. Not always about the person, but about yourself, about what you need, about how God loves you too much to let you stay attached to anything or anyone that would limit your growth. And then, one day, the thought will still come, but it won't control you. It won't hijack your peace. It will simply be a chapter in your story, not the whole book. And you'll thank God, not just for the release, but for the growth that came through the wrestle. Because in the end, every burdened thought has a purpose. Even if the purpose was simply to draw you closer to the one who holds every answer. Sometimes what haunts you isn't the person, it's the reflection of yourself that they awakened in you, a version of your heart that once dared to feel, to dream, to trust, to believe that change or connection or healing was possible. When someone leaves or a relationship fades, we often think it's the person we miss, but more often, it's who we were when they were in our lives. That's why the ache lingers long after the goodbye. You're not just grieving what you lost, you're wrestling with what was revealed. God, in His infinite wisdom, often uses people as mirrors, not to show you them, but to show you you. And not just the pretty polished parts, the raw ones too. The unhealed wounds, the unmet needs, the places you didn't even realize were still bleeding until someone touched them. Through their words, their absence, their kindness, or even their rejection, something in you was stirred, and now you're left sorting through the emotional debris, wondering what it all means. And while it's tempting to see it as a distraction or a mistake, what if it's something sacred? What if this whole experience, the joy, the confusion, the longing, the clarity, was actually a classroom? What if the pain was a lesson in disguise, and the memory is just God's way of bringing you back to that holy curriculum? You see, we often ask God for healing, for growth, for understanding, but we rarely expect the delivery method to be a person. We don't expect our answered prayer to come wrapped in heartbreak. But God isn't bound by our comfort zones or expectations. He knows that sometimes the most transformative moments come from the most unexpected teachers. The people you can't stop thinking about, the ones who changed your rhythm, who disrupted your peace, who cracked something open in you, may not have come to stay, but they came to serve a purpose. And when that purpose is revealed, everything begins to make sense. that doesn't mean it stops hurting right away. It just means you stop mislabeling the experience. You stop calling it a mistake. You stop seeing it as something to suppress or forget. You start asking better questions. What did this reveal in me? What insecurity was triggered? What old wound resurfaced? What part of me came alive? What part of me needs more healing? And in that quiet space of reflection, you begin to realize that God wasn't trying to destroy you with that connection. He was trying to develop you. He wasn't playing with your emotions. He was pulling your soul deeper into a place of honesty and awareness. Maybe for the first time in years, you realized how much you still crave being understood. Or maybe it brought out how easily you attach your worth to someone else's attention. Or maybe, for the first time, you allowed yourself to feel deeply instead of shutting down. Whatever it was, it mattered. It wasn't random. The ache has roots. And if you trace it with God, you'll find more than closure. You'll find revelation. We often confuse refinement with rejection. We think if something didn't last, it failed. If someone walked away, it wasn't meant. But God never promised that every person sent into your life would stay. What He did promise is that all things would work together for your good. Romans 8:28. That means even the ones who broke you open might have been the catalyst for your becoming. Even the ones who confused you may have pushed you toward clarity. Even the ones who never loved you right may have pointed you back to the only one who does. And that changes the narrative. Because now, instead of obsessing over why they came or why they left, you can ask what they unlocked in you. Now, instead of idolizing the memory or demonizing the pain, you can surrender it as part of your spiritual formation. Maybe they reminded you of your potential, or maybe they exposed how much healing you still need. Maybe they stirred up an old fear you thought you buried, or maybe they reminded you what it feels like to be pursued, to be chosen, to be noticed. And maybe, just maybe, God allowed that so He could reintroduce Himself to you. Maybe He allowed you to be seen by someone else just so you could realize how much He sees you still. Maybe He let that door close so you would finally walk through the one He's been holding open all along. This isn't about glorifying pain or making idols out of people. This is about recognizing that God is so intentional that He can use anyone to reach the parts of you that even you have forgotten. That doesn't mean everyone is safe. That doesn't mean every connection is pure. But it does mean that God is still sovereign even in your confusion. And sometimes, what the enemy meant to torment you, God will use to transform you. Sometimes the distraction is actually the diagnosis. The lingering thought is a symptom of a deeper issue, and the person you can't stop thinking about is just the vessel He used to surface the things you didn't even know you needed to heal. And when you start seeing it that way, when you zoom out and see it from heaven's angle, you stop trying so hard to escape the memory, and you start asking God what it's teaching you. You stop fighting the process, and you start flowing with it. And that's when things start to shift. Because healing rarely comes in a straight line. It comes in waves, in whispers, in flashbacks that take you by surprise. But with each one, you get a little clearer, a little freer, a little more whole. The person might still cross your mind, but they won't control your mind. The feeling might still arise, but it won't paralyze you. Because now you understand. It was never just about them. It was about you. About who you were becoming. About what God was refining. About the layers He was peeling back so you could see the beauty He always saw. And yes, sometimes we need reminders. Sometimes we'll have days where the memory hits harder, where the questions feel louder. That's okay. You're human. But even in those moments, God is with you, gentle, patient, still working. And every time you choose to lean into Him, instead of spiraling into confusion, you grow. Every time you let him interpret your emotions, instead of letting your emotions dictate your truth, you heal. Every time you stop chasing the past and start embracing the present, you step deeper into your purpose. So no, you're not crazy for still thinking about them. You're not weak for still caring. You're not broken because you haven't moved on as quickly as others think you should. You are in the middle of something holy. You are walking through a sacred unraveling and becoming. And one day, you'll look back and realize it wasn't about them. It was about you seeing yourself clearly through God's eyes. It was about you letting go of illusions and attachments that no longer serve your growth. It was about you becoming the healed, whole, and anchored version of yourself that God always intended. So take the memory and hold it gently. Not as a chain, but as a compass. Let it guide you, not back to them, but forward to Him. Let it be the spark that leads you deeper into prayer, deeper into wisdom, deeper into peace. Because when God uses someone to reveal you to yourself, it's not a punishment, it's a gift. And even if it came wrapped in confusion or pain, it's still holy. And it's still working for your good. But we must be careful. Not every attachment is sacred. Some are spiritual traps disguised as longing, pulling at the threads of our heart in such subtle ways that we confuse bondage with destiny. It can feel so real, so intense, that we begin to convince ourselves it must be from God. But intensity is not always confirmation. Just because someone lingers in your mind does not mean they are meant to remain in your life. This is where the enemy works with precision, using our emotional openness, our romantic ideals, and our unhealed wounds to plant a lie that masquerades as love. If the persistent thought of someone brings anxiety rather than peace, turmoil instead of clarity, shame instead of restoration, it may not be a sign from heaven, but a hook from hell. And this is not to scare you, but to sober you. Because soul ties are real. And while they can be forged through physical intimacy, they can also form through emotional dependency, spiritual entanglement, and even obsessive thought patterns. The enemy doesn't need your body to trap you, he only needs your agreement. Agreement that says, "This person completes me." Agreement that says, "Without them, I am not whole." But the truth is, only God completes you. Only Jesus makes you whole. Anything else is a counterfeit trying to slip in through the side door of your heart, bypassing discernment and dressing itself in nostalgia, longing, and emotional intensity. Consider Samson, a man chosen by God, anointed from birth, called to greatness, but unable to disconnect from a woman who was never aligned with his destiny. Delilah wasn't a random temptation, she was a spiritual distraction. His inability to sever that soul tie cost him his vision, his strength, and eventually his life. Let that truth settle deep in your spirit. Just because you can't stop thinking about someone doesn't mean you're supposed to pursue them. Sometimes the very thing that consumes your mind is the very thing God is trying to protect you from. And make no mistake, God will allow the weight of an unhealthy attachment to grow heavy enough that you can no longer carry it without His help. That pressure, that confusion, that emotional exhaustion, it's not punishment. It's a signal, a call to examine your heart, to pause and ask, is this drawing me toward God or away from Him? Am I obsessed with them because I believe they're God's promise? Or am I attached because my soul hasn't healed? There's a dangerous pattern we fall into when we mistake emotional resonance for spiritual alignment. Just because someone made you feel deeply doesn't mean they were sent to stay. And just because someone awakened something in you doesn't mean they were meant to walk with you into your future. Some people are catalysts, not companions. Their presence in your life stirred things up so God could begin the real work of healing, but they were never meant to take root. The mistake is in trying to replant what God already removed. And every time we do, we enter into emotional warfare, fighting for a connection that heaven is not backing up. That's why it's exhausting. That's why there's no peace. That's why prayer feels dry and worship feels distant, because you're dragging a weight God asked you to lay down. And here's the honest truth. No matter how sincere your feelings are, no matter how long you've held on to hope, if the fruit of that connection is confusion, chaos, and compromise, it's time to let go. This isn't about bitterness. This isn't about pretending you don't care. This is about protecting your spirit. You were never meant to stay tied to someone who consistently pulls you out of alignment with God's presence. It's not rejection, it's redirection. It's not punishment, it's preservation. And sometimes, the most spiritual thing you can do is sever a soul tie that's been keeping you stuck in emotional bondage. The soul tie might not even be physical. It could be a mental replay that keeps looping a memory over and over again until you start believing that no one else could ever measure up. That kind of thinking turns memory into an idol. It places more weight on a person's role in your past than on God's plan for your future. And idols never bless you. They only bind you. So how do you break free? First, you have to recognize the tie for what it is. Not a fairy tale, not a God-sent sign, but a spiritual distraction. You have to stop romanticizing dysfunction and call it what it is. Second, you must surrender, not just the person, but the entire idea of what they represented to you. Sometimes we hold on to someone because they symbolize the season we want back, the version of ourselves we miss, or the future we hoped for. Letting go, then, isn't just about them. It's about laying down every version of the story you thought you were writing. And that's not easy, but it's holy. Third, you have to renounce and replace. Renounce the emotional agreements you've made. Words like, "I'll never love again," or "they were my only chance," or "no one else will understand me like they did." Those are lies from the pit. Replace them with truth. Declare the word over your life. Say, "I am whole in Christ." Say, "My future is not tied to my past." Say, "God's plan for me cannot be ruined by one person walking away." And finally, fill the empty space with God. Breaking a soul tie leaves a gap, and if you don't let the Holy Spirit fill it, the enemy will offer counterfeits to soothe the pain. Don't settle for spiritual rebounds. Dive deeper into worship. Journal through your healing. Surround yourself with people who speak life, not people who reopen wounds. Fast. Pray, sit in God's presence. And yes, it may hurt for a while, it may feel like mourning, because in many ways, it is. You're grieving the illusion of what could have been. But on the other side of that grief is glory. On the other side of that release is revival. Because when you finally let go of what God never asked you to hold, your hands are free to receive what He's always had waiting. So if today you find yourself obsessing, replaying, regretting, take it as a prompt to go deeper. God doesn't bring conviction to shame you. He brings it to set you free. And freedom begins with a choice to stop feeding the tie, a choice to stop calling them the one that got away, a choice to stop asking what if and start declaring what's next. Your peace is not in their return. Your breakthrough is not in their apology. Your destiny is not in their hands. And the God who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it, with or without the one you keep thinking about. So breathe, let go, and trust that even this is part of your becoming. You're not crazy for caring. You're not weak for remembering. But you are called to be free. And that means the thought that once controlled you is now subject to Christ. Not every echo is eternal. Not every memory is a mandate. And not every soul tie is sacred. But the God who sees your heart, He is. And when you're ready to surrender this person, this thought, this cycle, you'll find He's already there, waiting to turn your distraction into deep healing, your longing into clarity, and your pain into peace. When you find yourself unable to stop thinking about someone, it may seem as if your mind is caught in an unrelenting loop, continuously returning to them like an echo that refuses to fade. This persistent thought can feel all-consuming, as if it holds some deeper, significant meaning that you're supposed to understand. And for many, there's an overwhelming sense of wanting closure, an urge to resolve whatever emotional or spiritual thread is still lingering. The truth is, sometimes this preoccupation with a person or a connection doesn't necessarily mean that the story is over. And even though it might feel like a chapter should be closed, it's possible that the narrative is still unfolding in ways that are beyond your immediate comprehension. Often, we are quick to assume that if we can't stop thinking about someone, there's unfinished business or some unresolved emotional tie that must be dealt with immediately. But the reality is more nuanced. Sometimes, the thoughts that keep surfacing are not a sign that something needs to be fixed or resumed, but rather a subtle invitation to trust in God's timing and understand that some stories, though paused, are not truly concluded. In these moments, it's vital to embrace the concept that not every relationship, connection, or experience is meant to remain fixed in time or come to a clear-cut resolution. It can be tempting to think that if a relationship ends, or if someone drifts away, the experience itself becomes meaningless, or that you failed in some way to tie up the loose ends. However, God, in His infinite wisdom, often orchestrates events that appear to be closed, only to reveal, in time, that they are simply dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface with purpose. The relationships, memories, and experiences you hold close may not be gone forever, but may instead be resting, with God allowing you to learn, grow, and heal until the moment is right for whatever God intends. This is where faith becomes critical, because the stories God is telling in your life are not constrained by your sense of time or closure. Sometimes, He's doing a work in you that requires a period of waiting, healing, and preparation, and in the process, He's shaping you into someone ready for what lies ahead, even if that's a future chapter in a relationship that hasn't yet come to full fruition. The key is not to rush or to force a narrative that isn't meant to be hurried. God's timing is not always aligned with our desire for immediate resolution. It can be frustrating, yes, when the story feels incomplete or the connection remains unresolved. But it's essential to remember that your relationship with God is the most important factor in this period of waiting. As you allow yourself to wait in peace and trust, you create space for God to work. The waiting period isn't wasted time. It's an opportunity for growth and understanding that will prepare you for whatever comes next, whether that's a continuation of a relationship or the wisdom you gain from letting it go. The person you're thinking of might not be meant to return now, or they may never come back at all, but the bond, the lesson, and the shared experience are not without value. In fact, God doesn't waste anything, not even relationships or emotional attachments that seem to have faded into the past. What may feel like a severed connection could be part of a larger picture that God is painting in your life. Trusting that God can use all things, even the painful or unfinished parts of your journey, allows you to release the need for control and embrace the divine order that He is creating. It's in this trust, this surrender, that you begin to see the purpose behind the waiting and the wisdom in not forcing the end of the story when it's not yet time. In some cases, these connections that linger in your thoughts may not be about an immediate resolution, but rather a lesson in patience, faith, and divine timing. God works in ways that are often beyond our understanding, and what feels like a missed opportunity a relationship that never fully developed, or an ending that's too abrupt may in fact be a crucial step towards something even more significant. This is where the importance of surrender comes in. Surrendering to the fact that you don't need to have all the answers right now, that the closure you're searching for might not come when or how you expect, and that waiting with trust in God's plan is itself a form of faith. We often want to hurry the process, rush the healing, and grasp at certainty, but God is patient and deliberate, and He's working even in the times we feel most uncertain. The challenge is not to give in to frustration or to try to force something that isn't meant to happen, but rather to trust that the person or situation that's lingering in your mind has its place in God's broader plan for your life. If it's truly part of His plan for you, it will return in His perfect timing, not in your rush to bring it to fruition. It might not be right now, and it might not be in the way you expect, but the story is still unfolding. So, instead of obsessing over an ending or chasing after a connection that seems to have slipped away, let go. Trust in the divine process and hold on to the faith that God knows the right time for everything to fall into place. The truth is that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the pauses, the moments of stillness and waiting where we learn to trust more deeply and surrender more fully. As difficult as it may be, trusting in God's timing and allowing Him to work in His own way will ultimately lead to a deeper understanding of yourself and the role that relationships, connections, and even the unspoken words that linger in your heart play in your life. If the connection was truly part of His plan, it will be restored when the time is right, and if not, you'll walk away with a heart more aligned with God's will, more prepared for what He has in store for you in the future. It's in the waiting that we often find the greatest spiritual growth, learning to release the things that we think we need to control and trusting in God's perfect timing and plan. Through this process, we realize that no experience, no connection, no relationship is ever wasted, and even when a chapter closes, God is always preparing us for the next part of our journey. As difficult as it might be to accept, we must embrace the truth that not every relationship is meant to last forever, and some people enter our lives to teach us valuable lessons, but their presence may not be permanent. This does not diminish the significance of the experience or the bond that was shared. Instead, it enriches our understanding of God's work in our lives, teaching us to lean on Him for guidance, understanding, and strength as we move forward. The story may not be over, but it may not look like we imagined it, and that, in itself, is a beautiful part of God's divine narrative. Imagine for a moment that every time a person who constantly lingers in your thoughts crosses your mind, instead of ruminating on the past, you turn that moment into a prayer. What if every time that person's memory resurfaced, you didn't spiral into confusion, frustration, or longing, but instead surrendered that thought to God, asking Him to bless them, heal them, guide them, and transform your heart in the process? Suddenly, the fixation you've been caught in shifts from obsession to divine opportunity. The thoughts that once consumed you, that kept you awake at night or distracted you throughout your day, can now become your spiritual practice, an intentional offering to God rather than a mental burden. This transformation is nothing short of miraculous. This powerful shift begins with understanding that not every thought, especially persistent ones, needs to be suppressed or ignored. It's not about forcing yourself to let go of the thoughts as if they are simply unimportant or unwanted. Instead, it's about surrendering those thoughts to God and using them as an opportunity to deepen your faith. Just imagine if each time that person entered your mind, you chose to respond by asking God to bless them, to heal their wounds, to guide their decisions. You could pray for their peace, for their strength, and for their purpose to be fulfilled in ways that you might never fully understand. What would happen if, instead of allowing your emotions and your mind to wander into bitterness, regret, or anxiety, You turn those moments into intercession, asking God to intervene in their life and in yours. This is where the power of prayer becomes truly transformative. In moments of pain, frustration, or confusion, prayer can be a lifeline, a way to transform your obsession into something holy and meaningful. Each prayer becomes a shift away from unhealthy attachment and toward the transformative power of God's presence. What once felt like a mental and emotional battle can now become an opportunity for spiritual growth. Rather than allowing your thoughts to control you, you take control of those thoughts and direct them toward God's will. As you begin to pray for the person who constantly occupies your thoughts, you'll notice something remarkable happening. Your heart starts to change. The bitterness, the hurt, the confusion, or the obsession that once clouded your thoughts slowly begins to dissipate. You begin to see that person through God's eyes, not through your own limited perspective. You may realize that, just as you're seeking healing and peace, so too are they. Perhaps the memory that constantly haunts you is not a sign of unresolved issues, but an invitation to pray for their healing, their growth, or their peace. In this way, the lingering presence of that person in your mind becomes a prompt for you to intercede for them, an opportunity for you to invite God's love into a space that might otherwise be filled with anxiety and frustration. But the process doesn't stop there. As you turn your obsession into intercession, you also begin to see the changes in yourself. It's one thing to pray for someone else's well-being, but it's another thing entirely to allow those prayers to deepen your own relationship with God. What happens when you pray not only for them, but also for yourself, asking God to work through you, to refine you, to teach you through this process? This is where true spiritual growth begins. The very thought that once weighed you down becomes a channel through which God can speak to you, shape you, and reveal parts of your own heart that need healing. Through this process of turning obsession into intercession, you begin to see the people in your life through a different lens. No longer are they just sources of pain or distraction. Instead, they become vessels through which God is working, whether in their lives, your life, or both. The obsession fades as you allow God's peace to fill the space that was once filled with worry, doubt, or regret. You begin to realize that this person, though they may never fully understand the impact they've had on you, are part of God's greater plan for your life. Your prayers for them become a way to partner with God in bringing about His will, not just in their life, but also in your own heart and mind. It's also important to recognize that not every thought, not every memory, and not every lingering emotion is something that needs to be eradicated. Some of these thoughts, while difficult, may carry with them a deeper invitation. They are not random. They are divine interruptions designed to bring you closer to God. Instead of ignoring the thought, pushing it away, or distracting yourself from it, you acknowledge it and surrender it to God. You invite Him into your pain, your confusion, your longing, and your hurt. You allow Him to speak to the very parts of you that you might be avoiding. What happens when you allow those persistent thoughts to be an entry point into a deeper relationship with God? Instead of viewing them as burdens or distractions, you begin to recognize them as opportunities for spiritual growth. Each time that person enters your mind, you choose to pray. You choose to trust that God is at work in ways you may not fully understand. And with each prayer, you begin to experience freedom from the past, freedom from the grip of obsession, and freedom to live in peace, knowing that God is in control and He is working all things together for your good. This shift from obsession to intercession is not just about changing your thought patterns. It's about embracing the deeper truth that God is always at work, even in the most difficult moments. It's about recognizing that nothing, not even your thoughts or emotions, is beyond His reach. He is always inviting you to bring your burdens, your struggles, and your distractions to Him in prayer. And when you do, you will find that He is faithful to meet you in those moments, to transform them, and to use them for His glory. So, what if every time you thought about them, you prayed instead? What if the very thing that once distracted you now became the thing that deepens your faith? What if your obsession became an opportunity for transformation, not just for you, but for the person you can't stop thinking about as well? This is the power of prayer, the ability to turn every thought, every lingering memory, and every obsession into something that brings you closer to God. And in the process, you will find yourself walking in deeper peace, greater clarity, and a deeper relationship with the One who knows you, loves you, and has a purpose for every thought, every feeling, and every prayer. Sometimes, the things we think about the most are the things that have had the deepest impact on our hearts and minds. These people, these memories, these moments, whether they bring us joy or pain, have a unique way of embedding themselves in our thoughts. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed, like we're drowning in these memories, these emotions. We seek closure, we search for understanding, and we long for resolution. But what if the story with this person isn't meant to end the way we expect? What if the lack of closure is not something we need to fear, but rather something we can use for spiritual growth? It's not always about getting an answer or reaching the end of the story. Sometimes, the absence of closure is a divine opportunity for transformation. We might not understand why things ended the way they did, or why the relationship unfolded the way it did, but the journey itself is what shapes us. Sometimes we don't need answers. We need to be refined by the experience. The longing we feel, the ache in our hearts, isn't necessarily a sign of something unfinished, but a call to press closer to God, to seek Him more earnestly, to allow Him to shape us in ways we couldn't have anticipated. In the midst of our confusion and uncertainty, God is always working. He uses people, experiences, and even unfulfilled desires to lead us closer to Him. We may be tempted to chase after closure, to try and piece together the broken pieces of our hearts. But in reality, true healing comes not from understanding every part of the story, but from drawing nearer to God in the process. It's about realizing that our peace doesn't come from the external circumstances being resolved. It comes from the internal shift that happens when we surrender our pain, our questions, and our longing to Him. When we can let go of the need for closure, we open ourselves up to a deeper understanding of God's work in our lives. We may not have the answers we want, but we can trust that God is using every situation, every relationship, every thought to refine us. The people who stirred our souls, whether in positive or negative ways, are often the very tools God uses to shape us into the people He wants us to become. It's not about getting closure from them. It's about getting clarity from God. It's about understanding that even the most painful, unresolved situations can lead to growth, to deeper intimacy with God, and to a greater sense of purpose in our lives. We must learn to let go of the need for everything to make sense. The longing that we feel, the thoughts that we can't shake, are often not signs of something broken, but signs of something being healed. God uses these moments to refine us, to make us more like Him. And in that process, we become stronger, wiser, and more whole. The person who left, the relationship that ended, or the connection that never fully materialized, they were never meant to define us. God is the one who defines us, and it's through His love, His grace, and His plan that we find true healing and peace. As you sit with these thoughts, as you reflect on the relationships that have shaped you, remember that closure is not the goal. The goal is transformation. The goal is becoming more like Christ. The goal is allowing every experience to refine us, to make us more sensitive to God's voice, and to lead us into a deeper, more intimate relationship with Him. Closure might never come, And that's okay. What matters is that we keep seeking God, keep trusting Him, and keep surrendering our pain, our questions, and our longings to His perfect plan. And remember, if the person was meant to return, they will. If the relationship was meant to be restored, it will happen in God's timing, not ours. But if it's not meant to be, trust that God used that person, that relationship, to shape you into someone even better, someone who is healed, restored, and awakened to the greater purposes God has for your life. You don't need closure to move forward. You just need clarity, and that clarity comes when you draw closer to God and allow Him to show you what He's doing in your life. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing the control we try to hold on to. It means trusting that God is in control, that He has a plan, and that He is working in the unseen, even when we can't see the full picture. The longing we feel for closure or understanding doesn't have to dominate us. Instead, it can be an invitation to draw near to God and let Him work in the spaces where we feel lost. God is a master at taking the broken pieces of our hearts and creating something beautiful. He doesn't waste our pain. He doesn't waste our longing. He doesn't waste any of our experiences. So instead of focusing on the things we don't understand, let's focus on the one who understands it all. He is the one who holds our stories, our futures, and our hearts in His hands. When we allow Him to refine us through the things that hurt, through the things that are unresolved, we begin to see that His plan is greater than anything we could have imagined. He will use every part of our story to draw us closer to Him and to help us become more like the person He created us to be. So, let it refine you. Let the unanswered questions, the lingering memories, and the unfulfilled desires lead you to a deeper relationship with God. Let go of the need for closure and trust that He is doing something greater in you. And if the person is meant to return, they will. But even if they don't, know that God has used that connection to make you into a better, stronger, and more awakened version of yourself. Trust in His timing, His plan, and His perfect love for you. If you've been carrying someone in your thoughts for days, months, or even years, know this: you're not crazy, broken, or weak. You're human. And humans were made to love deeply, feel fully, and remember honestly. But we were never meant to carry emotional weight alone. That's why Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Let God hold what your heart can't anymore. Let Him be the author of your memories, the editor of your regrets, and the protector of your future. You don't have to understand everything to move forward. You just have to trust that nothing enters your heart without first passing through His hands. And if that person still lingers in your mind after the prayers, the tears, the late nights, and the letting go, then hand them over again. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know that the most powerful thing you can do with a thought that won't let you go is to give it to the only one who knows what to do with it.